Thank you, Natasha. The last couple of days have been, to say the very least, confusing on the question of what's really going on in Syria. Our own analyst, John Jordan, you saw him right here on our air earlier this week, and we've played this again. He says the hostilities are finally starting to cool. But then we hear a U.S. claim, and we say claim because it didn't come with a lot of verification, that no, things have to heat up again because the Assad regime is about to use chemical weapons again, not soon after our analyst John Jordan said what he said. But here's where it gets even more weird, okay? While we are fighting ISIS, we as Americans, our military is fighting ISIS all over the world and groups associated with ISIS, in Syria, we kind of seem to be leaving them alone, if not kind of almost on their side in some bizarre ways. Is it because the Russians are fighting them? And if so, how can our enemy suddenly not be our enemy simply because they jumped the border or because of who they may be allied with? These are interesting questions, and who better to put them together or try to answer them than RT's Murad Gazdiev.
Russia and the regime's decision to launch airstrikes sends a terrible signal of disregard toward the UN political process.
Russia has claimed that its so-called retaliatory strikes were surgical, I quote, surgical in their precision. I hope I do not need medical treatment in Moscow if surgical accuracy means what we've seen.
We refuse to consider terrorists as untouchable and will continue to fight them despite the objections of some of our partners.
The United States reiterates that any escalation in violence in northwest Syria would destabilize the region.
We have our own view on who is destabilizing the region.
Both sides blame each other for this latest escalation. Fighting had been building up, escalating for days now. And as often happens, the rebels, jihadists, are crying foul, saying Assad's gassing them.
We continue to see signs that the Assad regime may be renewing its use of chemical weapons. The regime's attacks against the communities of northwest Syria must end.
Remarkably, nowhere in their press statement does the U.S. mention Al-Qaeda. No, HTS denies any affiliation. They rebranded, changed their name from Nusra Front, but that is seen as a ruse to avoid harsher scrutiny. Nothing has changed in their behavior, still executing infidels, fielding suicide bombers. So imagine our surprise when we did some digging and found that the initial source of these chemical attack allegations, which so concern the U.S., the initial source was HTS, Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda. Worth noting, though, is that the U.S. is saying they can't verify anything.
Bombing attacks, which have been indiscriminate and very vicious, have sent some 150 to 200,000 people in Idlib, most of whom are already internally displaced people, to move again to temporary housing and create a huge burden on our very broad humanitarian effort that we and the rest of the international community are making. So we're watching this very closely. Also, the reports of chemical weapons use. So far, we cannot confirm it, but we are watching it.
It's an interesting situation. The U.S., Europe, allies are spending billions infiltrating, bombing, fighting ISIS, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Somalia, all over the Middle East, in Africa. Yet in Syria's Idlib, Al-Qaeda's biggest stronghold, they're taking their side, if indirectly, demanding that the Syrian government leave them alone, taking seriously their claims and statements about chemical weapons. As I say, remarkable.
Thank you so much, Murad. By the way, we've also learned today that the Pentagon is drawing up a plan to send as many as 10,000 more troops into the Middle East. All right, it's time once again for the John Jordan to analyze this for us and help us try and figure it out. Is there a possibility, as Murad in his report seems to show, that we are not engaging this group, which let's just call them al-Nusra so everybody doesn't get too confused, which really is a branch of both ISIS and Al-Qaeda, right? while we're going after this same type of people all over the world, we're not doing it in Syria. And is that consistent? Is that right? Is that happening, John?
Well, first of all, the Russians and the Syrian army themselves have got them bottled up in Idlib and are handling it. I'm not sure how much value the U.S. has to add. A big part of American aversion to getting further involved in Syria is obviously, first of all, President Trump is trying to disentangle the U.S. from Syria. And second of all, we have Iran there, and that's another problem for the United States. But the bottom line, I'm not sure that we would add a lot of value in the conflict in Syria with regard to al-Nusra, who everybody agrees that they are bad guys, and they are in control largely in Idlib.
Is this truly still a bit of a proxy war between the Russians and what they want and their support of Assad and the United States, who really has been trying to get Assad out of there for more than a decade and sometimes being accused of using the old chemical weapon ploy as an excuse?
Well, first of all, the chemical weapons ploy, nobody really knows whether or not they've been used. It's also possible that al-Nusra, and I think is quite likely, provoked this attack in order for there to be a response by the Syrian army and the Russians so that they can have these types of horrible stories displayed all over TV. So all of a sudden, they're the good guys in Idlib. So there may be a little bit of propaganda warfare there. Let's not overlook Iran's role here. I mean, yes, there is some conflict between the United States and Russia in Syria, but that is minor from America's perspective with regard to our broader conflict with Iran, because that involves not only us, it involves Israel and the entire Middle East. So I think that is really the most important dimension of this, is the Iranian one, which really isn't part of this particular story.
How involved are the Iranians then? You say they're there. What are they doing that's so alarming?
Well, they're not doing anything right now in Idlib, but the Iranians do have troops, do have resources, also militant groups, potentially missile launching, and rocket sites throughout Syria. They're kind of taking advantage of this, but they're doing it in another part of Syria, the part that's closer to the Golan and Israel.
You finally, John, we're just down to a couple of seconds, but you did go on the air on Monday and you did say you see hostilities finally starting to cease. You think maybe the civil war is coming to an end. Within the last couple of days, that seems to have changed dramatically. Do you agree?
What I said it was coming to an end, that this phase of the conflict in Syria was coming to an end. I didn't say it was over, and I still don't think it's over.
I know.
But now it's morphing into something else. It's going to morph into an Israeli conflict with Iran.
My friend, we thank you, as usual, for joining us and having the wisdom to share with us. Thank you, John Jordan. I'm Rick Sanchez. You found us on YouTube, and that's awesome. But you know what? I'm also live every night at 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern on DirecTV and Dish and cable and satellite, the RT app, and Pluto TV. I'll see you there.